Thank you, Amy, for the music. Welcome to Wash Park UCC. Welcome back if you've been here before. If you haven't been, welcome to a highly scripted, very super well-produced thing. No, that's an average Sunday. Then there's this Sunday with the time change and a number of other things that have happened. I am not our pastor, Reverend Dr. Lee Berg. He is spending time with his family today, and I am filling in for him. I'm Eric McEuen. I'm the music director here and worship coordinator. And I'm filling in more ways than I expected. We've had some unexpected things happen this morning, including some sound system challenges to keep us on our toes, but we seem to be in good shape now. Peter is working heroically this morning. After a weekend in which Peter and Allyson spent 16 hours in the hospital, checking out Allyson's health state, and I understand there were many tests, and the end result is that she is fine, and there were many tests on the way, but she's also exhausted, so she's not here. We were going to do communion today, but because of that, Allyson was going to preside over communion. We have just postponed communion to next week. Does everyone here have a bulletin? We may end up needing to share because we're not able to print more just now. So if we run out, just remember your neighbor and please share. And I will point us to this table on which there is a pair of shoes that is different from the pair of shoes that was there last week. Our Lent theme and symbol is shoes for the journey. Who knows, every week it might be a different pair of shoes. But at any rate, we are using that theme through Lent, and at the end of Lent we will invite a collection of shoes, in particular athletic shoes, sneakers, good quality walking shoes, particularly in men's sizes, as a donation for the St. Francis Center. I think those are the things I wanted to cover in my intro. Welcome. And why don't we breathe a moment? And now I will invite Beth to lead us in our call to celebration.
Please join me in the call to celebration. With light from Spirit, our minds and each other, let us travel in paths of justice and solidarity. With connection to the whole earth community, with gratitude for beauty, for life, and for each other. With love and companionship shared in community. The first sacred reading comes from Luke 10, 1 through 11. After this, the sovereign appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead, 2 by 2, into every town and place where he himself was about to come. And he said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray therefore the sovereign of the harvest to set out laborers into the harvest. Go your way. I send you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and salute no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace be to this house.' And if a person of peace is there, your peace shall rest on it. But if not, it shall return to you. And remain the same in the house, eating and drinking what they provide, for a laborer deserves wages. Do not go from house to house. Whenever you enter the town and they receive you, eat what is set before you, heal the sick in it, and say to them, 'The realm of God has come near to you.' But whenever you enter a town and they do not receive you, go into its streets and say, 'Even the dust of your town that clings to our feet, we wipe against you.' Nevertheless, know that the realm of God has come near." The second reading is from Reverend Ann Dunlap. The Bible is not the victory handbook of the empire, but the outcry and deeply human wrestlings of the oppressed.
Before I begin here, I want to speak about a couple of anniversaries that happen to come up this week. This week happens to be 6 years since I was hired here as music director at Wash Park UCC. This community has been good to me. I appreciate it. It was 3 years ago this week that we shut down in-person services because of COVID, and then began the process of reinventing what we do here on Sundays. At first, we were online only, and then eventually hybrid, in-person and online. But that week, 3 years ago, we went abruptly from a fairly big Sunday with Sister Ardith Platt as our guest preacher, and a lunch and learn event with her and a fellow Dominican nun following our service, to just Pastor Lee and me in our sanctuary, broadcasting on Facebook Live, our very first version of an online service. We've come a long way since then, and it's been a journey together, hasn't it? Today I'm going to explore territory that we don't often talk about here, and if this subject today doesn't speak to you, that's okay. I hope you'll bear with me. My mentor, Jim Matulski, likes to say that UCC stands for Ultimate Choice Church. This is where I'm choosing to focus today. By most normal measures, the life of Jesus didn't look like a success. As the story comes down to us, he did and said some things that made some people wonder, that infuriated other people, and that left some people feeling that they had seen or experienced salvation, whatever that meant to them. He led a movement for a few years, ran afoul of the authorities of church and state, which in his time and place were more or less the same thing, or at least closely linked. And he became a victim of capital punishment. Now, the most predictable thing in the world would be for the story to end there. Jesus leads a countercultural movement within a powerful empire. He fails, he's executed, then he's forgotten. Movement over. One of the most bizarre and surprising things in history, in my view, is that this isn't where the story ends. And for the purpose of today's message, I'm not even going to deal with the question of resurrection. Feel free to come back on Easter. We'll talk more about that then. Today I'm going to focus on a paradox that comes earlier in the story. The fact that Jesus is considered somehow a representative of the divine, despite his humiliating death and his apparent lack of success. Now, I know we progressive Christians often don't like to talk much about the cross, and I get this. I think it's very understandable, especially considering ways the image of the cross gets used and misused. From telling people who are already suffering to take up their cross and bear it, to the idea that Jesus died for our sins, which is often paired with the image of a violent, punishing God, to various formulas about Jesus' death accomplishing salvation in some cosmic sense. A lot of it is hard to take. In fact, to some of the things that get said about crucifixion and salvation, I want to say this. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. That's especially for the Princess Bride fans in here. My intent today is to look at the image of a crucified God figure from the standpoint of justice and liberation. What can we learn from this image that might help for those purposes? New Testament scholar Stephen Patterson, in a book called Beyond the Passion, Rethinking the Death and Life of Jesus, poses this question. What does it mean to follow a Messiah who was made the victim of Rome's empire? I read that question recently, and it reminded me of a question I once heard from Father Richard Rohr when I lived in Albuquerque, where he is. If you were to invent an image for God, would you choose a naked, bleeding man crucified outside the city walls? I have to admit I wouldn't. And something about the question also haunted me, drew me in. It's a mystery that I found somehow compelling. What is going on here? Years later, I still have a relationship with that particular mystery, and I'm going to try to say something about why. This week, thinking and feeling my way through that subject, I arrived at this memory. Last October, when I was in the Twin Cities for a few days, one night I was driving back to the house in Minneapolis where I was staying with friends of Diane and Scott Peterson. It had been a long day, which included me contributing music to a chapel service at United Theological Seminary, then staying for the rest of the day at a symposium gathering there that went until 9, then taking myself out to get some food and decompress. I was tired, with 2 more days of that symposium to go. On my way back to my friend's house, I came upon an intersection with a burned-out gas station. In between gas pumps that were clearly no longer in use, a small fire was burning, safely contained within a round metal tub. A few benches were arranged in a loose circle around the fire. A man was sitting on one of them, warming himself by the fire. And up against one of the former gas pumps, was that a piano with flowers arranged on top of it? What was going on here? Then I started noticing that a lot of the walls around this intersection were painted, some with pictures, mostly faces, some with words like, "Where there's people, there's power," and "Stop the violence." Finally, I saw a small official-looking sign by the side of the road, which said, George Floyd Square. It was late. It was close to midnight, and I was tired, and I was on my own in a city where I knew only a few people. But I stopped and I got out of my car. Something compelled me to see what I could, then and there, to look around and learn, and to bear witness. I must have spent close to an hour that night walking around and looking at things, paying respects, offering prayer, and taking pictures, bearing witness. There was nobody there but me and the man sitting by the fire, and we left each other alone. 2 days later, I came back in daylight. This time, the square wasn't nearly so quiet. Now I was one of 100 or so people walking around, looking at things, taking pictures, offering prayer, bearing witness. I did my best to take pictures that didn't include the images of strangers, and that was a challenge. And well, there were a lot of us, and I didn't know anyone there, and I assume a lot of us didn't know each other. There was kind of a hushed, reverent tone among the people there, very polite, loving, almost joyful. And it was that day in daylight that I noticed a handmade sign saying, "This is a sacred space," right next to another sign that said, "Say his name," bearing witness. And it was also that day that I saw in person an image I'd seen before and even used on one of our church bulletins, the color painting that shows George Floyd's face and name, as well as the names of many others, with the words at the bottom, "I can breathe now." Let's take a minute and breathe. The communally created work of art that is George Floyd Square today, with many contributions from many people, is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. 4.5 months later, I'm still trying to get a handle on my feelings about it. But there's something there I find compelling and mysterious. How was so much beauty created out of tragedy? It's a mystery. I think this has something to do with the way Jesus' death is remembered. A victim of the Roman Empire, one put to death in a painful, humiliating way which the Roman Empire reserved for dissidents and rebels. A victim of the powers that be in that time and place as they relied on violence to get their way. What can it mean that we see God in this? One thing I think it means is a sense of deep, deep solidarity. If we are suffering, then God understands our suffering because God has suffered too. Richard Rohr points out, the vast majority of people throughout history has been poor, disabled, or oppressed in some way, that is, on the bottom, and would have experienced history in terms of a need for change. He also points out that the writings preserved in our Bible, starting with the Hebrew Scriptures and continuing with what Christians call the New Testament, are maybe the only existing writings from the ancient world that are written from the viewpoint of those at the bottom of the social order, not the top. So instead of justifications for the way things are and praise of the goodness of the current king, or rather right in the midst of those things, you have prophetic declarations that God is unhappy because the needs of the most vulnerable are being overlooked. Widows and orphans is a common term for the most vulnerable in those days. Richard Rohr calls this perspective the bias from the bottom and made it a foundational value of the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque. Formalized in these words, practical truth is more likely to be found at the bottom and the edges than at the top or the center of most groups, institutions, and cultures. We've also heard from our own Beth Roby Hyde that our very notion of social justice originates with the Hebrew prophets, especially Amos, and with their relentless attention to people on the margins. This is the tradition that formed Jesus. I would say that's the tradition Jesus carries on. And we just heard the words of Reverend Ann Dunlap, whom many of us know if we've been at this church a few years. The Bible is not the victory handbook of the empire, but the outcry and deeply human wrestlings of the oppressed. From this perspective, the people on the margins not only matter, they have special value in God's eyes. If we are suffering, then God understands our suffering, and God cares about those who suffer. But don't just take it from me or Father Richard Rohr or Reverend Ann Dunlap, all of whom happen to be white Americans. I was also reminded this week of how important the image of the cross is and has been to many black Christians in this country. The black American theologian James Cone, who died in 2018, was a pioneer of what is now called Black liberation theology. In response to the liberation theology arising out of Latin America in the late 1960s, which itself was a response to tremendous poverty and suffering, and summed up in the phrase preferential option for the poor, James McEuen began writing a theology of liberation from his perspective as a Black American. In an early book titled A Black Theology of Liberation, James McEuen wrote, "Christian theology is a theology of liberation. There can be no Christian theology that is not identified unreservedly with those who are humiliated and abused." And in one of his last books, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, which draws eerie parallels between those forms of execution, James McEuen wrote, "In the mystery of God's revelation, Black Christians believed that just knowing that Jesus went through an experience of suffering in a manner similar to theirs gave them faith that God was with them, even in suffering on lynching trees, just as God was present with Jesus in suffering on the cross. The more Black people struggled against white supremacy, the more they found in the cross the spiritual power to resist the violence they so often suffered. If we are suffering, then God understands our suffering, and God is with those who suffer." I think this is one good starting point, being willing to be open to the pain of the world, to let it break our hearts, to be changed by it. And not to stop there. Valerie Kaur, whose work on revolutionary love we've engaged together in this congregation, wrote this in her beautiful book, See No Stranger. "When we allow ourselves to be changed by the experience of another's pain, we build bonds with people we once called strangers. Sharing in one another's grief can also lead to sharing in one another's joy. America's greatest social movements for civil rights, immigrants' rights, women's rights, union organizing, queer and trans rights, farm workers' rights, indigenous sovereignty, and Black lives were rooted in the solidarity that came from shared grieving. First, people grieved together. Then they organized together. Often they sang and celebrated together. Okay, but what about those of us whose hearts have been broken too many times already? These days, doesn't it seem like we're all just taking in too much bad news, too much pain, often in places in the world where we can't even do anything about it? What are we supposed to do about this? I don't have the answer for that. But one thing I can see is that the Christian faith began out of suffering, out of the suffering of Jewish peasants under the Roman Empire, which might be a level of suffering most of us can hardly even imagine. Something emerged, a tradition which has far outlasted that time and place, and which continues to be a source of strength and comfort for many people today. At its center is this mysterious image of a crucified Messiah, or a God who was killed by the ways of empire. One more thread I want to connect before I wrap up here. Here at Wash Park UCC, ecological concern is a big part of our ethos. So to take this in an ecological direction, what does it mean to learn from a suffering planet, or to act in solidarity with it? I was moved a couple weeks ago at Congregations Alive, hearing our own Peter Sawtell speak about what he describes as one of his conversion experiences. I'll paraphrase what stuck with me the most. Once the pain and grief from climate change moved from his head into his heart. He had to do something about it. The grief was going to be there anyway, and he felt he had to do what he could, so he made that a significant part of his life's work with Eco-Justice Ministries. Leonardo Boff, a liberation theologian from Brazil, has made the connection between liberation and ecology explicit in some of his books. In a book called Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, he wrote, "Liberation theology and ecological discourse have something in common. They start from two bleeding wounds, the wound of poverty and the wound of systematic assault on the earth." Now, we at Wash Park As I said, ecological thinking is part of our ethos, and I would say we've embodied some of this already. At some point, we even decided that instead of a conventional image of a cross, we would put this painting by Bill McClure on our cross, suggesting what is being crucified today: nature and earth-based spiritual traditions for a start. Now, we at Wash Park UCC like to lift up justice passages like Matthew 25 and Micah 6:8, passages that support the work of justice, and I think this is a very good thing. We like to work and advocate on behalf of those who are in need, from working at St. Francis Center to feeding people via the Fish Food Pantry, from advocating for just policies to working with immigrants. And these are all good. And I want to invite us a little further in terms of perspective. The life of Jesus, which can appear unsuccessful, was marked by a thorough embrace of values that ran counter to those of the Roman Empire, the economic and military empire of his day. In the place of violent retaliation, Jesus was thoroughly nonviolent, even to the point of his death. As Luke tells the story, Jesus even asks forgiveness for those who kill him. The passage from Luke that we heard today is the story of a journey within a journey. Early on within a larger narrative of a journey to Jerusalem, which occupies more than 10 chapters of the Gospel of Luke, Jesus invites some of his followers, not just the 12 disciples, but a larger group, 70 or 72 in different versions, into an experience of shared vulnerability. And these were likely to be people who were already vulnerable, already on the bottom of the social order. They are to travel into nearby towns and villages, unarmed and without conventional means of security, such as money or extra clothes. But not alone. He sends them out 2 by 2, so they always have community. They are to accept hospitality, share words of peace, and move on if that peace is not returned. And Jesus acknowledges that this is difficult, even dangerous. I send you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. There must be some urgent reason that this level of vulnerability was necessary for forming the kind of community Jesus was leading and modeling. Maybe the urgency had to do with the journey toward Jerusalem, where Jesus was going to be killed. Maybe it was necessary for breaking people out of their habits and their security systems and their conventional thinking. Nicola Torbett is a UCC member in Oakland, California, whom I met when I was in seminary in Berkeley. And she's a regular contributor to a podcast called The Word is Resistance, a faith-based resource from Surge, showing up for racial justice, which is curated by Reverend Ann Dunlap. That podcast's emphasis is on helping white Christians see what resources the Christian scriptures hold for the work toward a more just world. And his theme song is We Are Building Up a New World, which we often sing in this church. In an episode of that podcast from July 2019, with headlines about a crisis in migration, a crisis on the border, many migrants being detained at the border, Nicola connected that news with this passage, and she said, often we read this passage with the assumption that we are the disciples in question, right? And we're receiving instructions here. We are the eager laborers who have signed up for the harvest. We are the ones being sent out like sheep among wolves to bring good news to anyone who will receive it. And that is a valuable way of reading this text. But I want to suggest for this week that we who are white documented American citizens are actually more like the villagers on the route from here to Jerusalem. We might become disciples. We might be converted and drop everything to follow. That is the hope. But in this story, we are more like the villagers. And the question is, will we welcome the messengers being sent to us? Will we welcome those who themselves have been sent out like sheep among wolves? Read this way, this passage is all about hospitality. Now, I'm quoting at length here because this reflection changed my perspective so much. Nicola Torbett goes on to say, if we as white Americans are the villagers who may or may not offer hospitality, then the disciples, The messengers sent from Jesus to announce Jesus' imminent arrival. Those messengers are migrants. They are so-called black identity extremists. They are trans women of color. They are unsheltered people living in tent encampments in our cities. They are queer as queer can be, and they are undocumented. And what is the message they are bringing us? Nicola then interprets the words, "The kingdom or realm of God has come near," to mean everything must change. She goes on to say this: "There are no easy answers. There is no solution that requires less than everything from us. Everything meaning drastic efforts to slow climate change. Everything meaning the sharing of resources across borders. Everything meaning maybe even the dissolution of nation states as we have known them. Maybe the whole way we organize the world is going to flare out. Breathe. Keep breathing." I invite us here to keep breathing and to ask, are we willing, how far are we willing to let our hearts open to the pain of the world and to the good news that may be on the other side of that pain if we're willing to go there? So as a second starting point, I'm going to invite us to consider the bias from the bottom, which may look like continuing to learn what we can from those on the margins of society. Richard Rohr writes again, "When Scripture is read through the eyes of vulnerability, what we call the preferential option for the poor or the bias from the bottom, it will always be liberating and transformative." So we can listen to those voices of those on the margins. We can let our hearts break for the pain of the world. We can grieve. And then what? What can we do here and now to act in the hope of a better world? One thing I think we can do, one thing I think we do well here, is to live right now as if that better world is already here, to be the change we wish to see in the world, to be as kind, loving, merciful, generous, forgiving, hospitable, even humble and vulnerable, as we wish everyone was, as we wish the world were. Or, in the words of another sign I saw at George Floyd Square, beneath "Listen to the mothers," which I also think is valuable advice, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. No pressure. And next up on our way to Life of Our Community, we have a Kairos moment from Bev Rexroad.
Okay, we're ready, Peter. Okay. I was so excited when the Kairos group asked me if it would be a good idea to have the endangered monk seal as one of our focus endangered species for the month. And as I have spent hundreds of hours out on the beach with these monk seals, I was just excited, and these are all my photos, so you can take a look at them as I'm speaking. If you have questions about them, because there's a real variety of them, the seals on the beach, there's me teaching children in schools, there's some of the facilities that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has out there to take care of these seals. So just take a look at them, see if there's questions, and I will be available to answer them. But an endangered species are the canaries in the coal mine. When a species does not have sufficient population for long-term survival on its own, it is telling us that something is wrong with the environment, or how it is treated, or maybe past difficulties which the species cannot overcome. And that is what happened to the Caribbean monk seal, which was last seen in 1952 and officially declared extinct in 2008. The Hawaiian monk seal is a conservation-reliant species, which requires continuing species-specific wildlife management intervention in order to survive. There are currently 1,400 seals all in the Hawaiian archipelago, and 30% of those are due to the intervention efforts made by NOAA and the volunteers. How did the monk seal get to be endangered? While some of the original Polynesian inhabitants of the islands may have done some hunting, the most danger to the species came in the 19th century with intense hunting by whalers and sealers for its meat, oil, and skin. The seals retreated to the more deserted Northwest Islands and were rarely seen in the main islands until about 25 years ago. Don't you think that if the seals were around when Elvis was making all of his movies in the 1950s and 60s, that there would have been seals in those movies too? But they just weren't around those islands. Occasionally they would be seen. But in the last 25 years, those seals have started coming down from the Northwest Islands into the main islands. They still have a larger population in the Northwest Islands, about 1,000 seals and 400 in the main islands. In the Northwestern Islands, the seals face issues from disappearing habitat as sea levels rise and the atolls sink beneath the ocean surface. Seals haul out for rest, for raising their pups, and their yearly molt on these deserted atolls. Also, the Galapagos sharks pose a danger to the seals in those islands, especially around the French Frigate Islands. They do kill the young pups and more vulnerable smaller seals, and they also compete for the same food. In the last 25 years, as they started moving down the island chain to the main islands, seals face additional different dangers, from negative human interactions, pets, dying reefs, which are the habitat for many of the monk seals' foods, diseases, marine debris, fishing gear, and fishing hooks. So what about those canaries in the coal mine? What must we change? And do we have the capability to change? NOAA sends teams to the Northwest Islands to pick up tons of marine debris every year. The state of Hawaii has outlawed plastic bags and the types of sunblock that kill off reefs. Volunteers watch for seals in trouble so that NOAA can intercede. Education is a priority for all visitors and locals in schools, libraries, resorts. And then there's the feral cats. People have released cats on the islands, and there's hundreds of thousands of cats. They are a carrier of toxoplasmosis, and that is now in the environment out there, and toxoplasmosis is killing more monk seals than any other reason right now. Feral cats are currently being captured and spayed because they don't want to just kill them. Beach cleanups take place every weekend. It takes the entire community. As a conservation-reliant species, the monk seals need both the professional work of NOAA, the Marine Mammal Center, the Coast Guard, and the volunteers. The Coast Guard will fly seals that are underweight down to the Marine Mammal Center, which is on the Big Island, where they will feed them and get them back in shape to be returned to their original place. They also have a place where they can do operations to remove fish hooks that the seals have managed to find. And volunteers walk the beaches looking for seals needing care. We watch over the moms and the pups during the essential nursing periods. We watch the seals that are hauled out for rest or molting, and we assist the professionals in their help as they were giving them vaccinations or finding seals that needed help during the times of when certain boats would sink and there was fuel spills. We would look for seals for them to try to take to other locations so the seals did not get sick. I spent a lot of time doing education. These are some of the kids. And they had a lot of fun, and we would teach them, what do you do when you go out on the beach? And how do you take care of them? Well, first of all, you stay 150 feet away from them. Did you ever try to tell a 5-year-old 150 feet? How do you realize what that is? So you do the rule of thumb. You close one eye, you put your thumb out. If your thumb can cover the entire seal, then you're far enough away. They always have their thumbs with them on the beaches. So anyway, I had a lot of fun when I was in Hawaii doing as a volunteer, and endangered species are just important because they are telling us that something is wrong and something must change. Thank you.
Now, I don't usually do the invitation to offering, but we invite and we welcome and we are grateful for your continued support of this community in all the ways that manifests. Anything you give to us financially can help us do all the things we do, from keeping the lights on to supporting various causes in the world, which we've already named today. We're not currently passing a plate or a basket, but there's a collection plate on the communion table in the middle of the room. You also can mail a check to Wash Park UCC, 400 South Williams, Denver, Colorado, 80209. I hope I have that right. I don't say it every week like Pastor Lee does. So we invite you to consider contributing generously, and above all, we're grateful you're here as part of us. I'm going to sing a very short song of reflection. Maybe I'll just move this mic over where my guitar is. This song is by Malvina Reynolds, who might be best known for Little Boxes on the Hillside. But she also wrote this song. Yes, such a catchy song. I remember it from camp when I was a kid. She also wrote this song, which says in 2 minutes some of the things I tried to say in more than 20. God bless the grass that grows through the crack. They roll the concrete over it to try and keep it back. The concrete gets tired of what it has to do. It breaks and it buckles and the grass grows through. and God bless the grass. God bless the truth that fights toward the sun. They roll the lies over it and think that it is done. It moves through the ground and it reaches for the air, and after a while it is growing everywhere, and God bless the grass. God bless the grass that grows through cement. It's green and it's tender and it's easily bent, but after a while it lifts up its head, for the grass is living and the stone is dead, and God bless the grass. God bless the grass that's gentle and low. Its roots, they are deep, and its will is to grow. And God bless the truth, the friend of the poor, and the wild grass growing at the poor man's door. And God bless the grass.
Well, after that song, I'm going to quit trying to kill the grass in the sidewalks. Join me with the prayer of dedication. Spirit of love, who goes with us in all our journeys, may these gifts and our self-giving create healing and empowering communities in the world. Amen.
All right, I invite you once more to rise as you're willing and able, in body, mind, or spirit. For our closing song, Go Make a Difference. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. We are the salt of the earth, called to let the people see the love of God for you and me. We are the light of the world, not to be hidden but be seen. Go make a difference in the world. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. We are the hands of Christ, reaching out to those in need, the face of God for all to see. We are the Spirit of truth, we are the voice of peace. Go make a difference in the world. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. One more, go make a difference. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. Go make a difference, we can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. Yes, go make a difference in the world. We can make a difference, whether you need a difference to be made, or whether you feel energy for making a difference, or both. May you go forward in the solidarity of community. Amen.